We did have some, some fun together, Matthew. And I also learned a lot from you and your creativity and your energy. Thank you for that. The familiar phrase, "what's past is prologue," comes, of course, from William Shakespeare's play The Tempest. And while that context there is rather dark and foreboding, the words themselves have come to mean something a little more hopeful. That the past in some way, in some significant way, sets the stage for the future, for the opportunities and choices and challenges of the future. Now, among my challenges this evening, in addition to brevity and clarity, is whether to be a preacher, prognosticator, prophet, or pugilist, punching at some carefully staged straw targets, and perhaps to be a little bit personal. In the end, given my Russian Mennonite heritage, I decided to mix it all together and make borscht. I think the trajectory of my life was set when I boarded the train in Toronto at Union Station on Labor Day weekend, 1970, bound for faraway and foreign places I had never visited: Winnipeg, Manitoba, and Canadian Mennonite Bible College. Here I was introduced, gradually and gently, to the tumultuous and sometimes revolutionary social and political changes of the 1960s and 70s. At CMBC, I would begin to own my inherited faith, come to know and claim my Anabaptist Mennonite heritage, and develop a faith-based social conscience and sense a call to service of some sort in the church. CMBC was also a significant gathering and meeting place. Not only did I meet Leonora there, I also learned to know the leaders of the Conference of Mennonites in Canada, whose offices were located on the campus. And I met many of the volunteer board and committee members of the conference who gathered there regularly for meetings. And the menu always improved those days. I never anticipated a mere 10 years later that I would be joining many of these folks from across Canada at those meetings in that place as a member of the Congregational Resources Board. That's the power and influence of institutions and the connections they offer, a gift of and to the church, a gift that keeps on giving. Now, my dreams at college were of an academic career, but our eldest daughter reminded me of an even wilder dream as I was wrestling with and resisting God's call and that of the search committee here at Grable in 2002. "Dad," she exclaimed with some impatience over the phone from Indonesia, where she was serving with MCC SALT, "isn't that what you dreamed of doing when you were at CMBC?" True enough. A close friend and I had occasionally fantasized in those turbulent and heady times that one day we would be in charge of the failing institutions of the church. I as president of CMBC, he as president of Grable, and then the young adults would finally be taught, trained, and equipped as they needed to be for the challenges of our deeply fractured and hurting world. And then the church would fully recover the biblical and Anabaptist vision and be set on its intended course. As I said, those were heady days. But her recollection helped me hear and follow the call to institutional leadership some 30 years later. As a young adult, she reminded me of the hopes and dreams for the church planted in me by the church when I was her age. Young adults, another gift of and to the church. But back momentarily to the 1960s and 70s, when singer and songwriter Bob Dylan observed, "The times they are a-changin'." We baby boomers did want to change the world. And since Christendom, by and large, still defined our world, for many of us, changing the world meant changing the church. As New York Times columnist Ross Douthat pointed out recently, boomers were the last generation to come of age with some traditional edifices still standing. The old norms and Christianish, his word, religion, which gave them something powerful to wrestle with, to rework and react against and attempt to overthrow. That cultural ferment of the 60s and 70s of ideas, trends, and forces, and tension and friction with each other, community and individualism, secular and sacred, new ideas, traditional beliefs, younger generation, older generation, and so on. All of these, he suggests, provided a shared experience of rebellion, uniting millions of young people and generating a blaze of creativity. Now that tension and conflict, the energy and creativity, was also very much evident in the church at the time, resulting in new expressions of faith and worship, programs and ministry. Some took root, others did not. It's interesting to note, however, that many of us who reacted against and even rebelled against the church and its structures and institutions at the time stuck around or returned later to become involved in those very institutions and structures and programs. Now, ironically, in many ways, the boomer rebellion eventually succeeded. And now, we aging boomers are wondering what happened to the programs and institutions which formed us, in which we then became deeply involved and which we supported. And now we are anxious about what will become of the church in an age of post-institutionalism, post-denominationalism, indeed post-Christendom. I pondered this recently when two of our young grandsons, 2 and 4, were trying to chop down a dead tree in the backyard. Its trunk at least 4 or 5 inches in diameter, using their plastic garden tools and a broom handle. They were resourceful and persistent. When the tree wouldn't fall, they tied a skipping rope to it and tried to pull it down. When it still wouldn't budge, they called Opa to help. I pointed out gently that although the tree had some dead branches, there were others that were very much alive, sprouting green leaves and bright pink blossoms. No, they insisted, the tree is dead. It has to be cut down. Now, the most they could do was strip some of the loose bark off the trunk, but that only encouraged them, and so they carried on. Reflecting on that entertaining experience, I thought about the church. The judgments about its health, its life, its demise, assaults on its very meaning and existence, and the tools or weapons sometimes used against it and its foundation, which is Jesus Christ. Douthat wonders whether current technologies and social change have left society too fragmented, polarized, and alienated from one another, too divided by belief and taste and language to build something new together. I wonder, too. But I believe in the resurrection. Therefore, I believe new life can emerge from death. After all, we know that the church is God's enterprise, and God's Spirit gives it life and breath, even where there is decline and death. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't have invested my life in it, nor would you. I see many signs of life and hope, and here are just a few. First, youth and young adults. Andy Brubaker-Caitler, associate professor at our seminary, AMBS, in Elkhart, recently observed in a conversation about how to call more people into ministry that he finds young adults to be, quote, surprisingly optimistic and interested in being involved in the church, end quote. I concur. I hear youth and young adults yearning for an intergenerational church experience. eager to build genuine relationships and deeper personal engagement, impatient to move beyond the confines of church buildings and programs to meaningful involvement that makes a difference in the community, passionate about making a global impact. Sounds a lot like many of us boomers 40 and 50 years ago. Many young adults today may be rejecting the form, but not the content of the Christian faith. Some see it as choosing spirituality over religion. Young adults are calling us to go deeper in faith, to talk about it more freely and boldly, engage the issues of the day from a faith perspective, become more actively involved in our communities, respond to the pressing needs around us, and find new ways of being church rather than doing church as we've always done it. One example is the Emerging Voices Initiative, a self-formed group of young adults seeking to engage actively in the future directions process and the restructuring conversation in Mennonite Church Canada. Here's their self-description. Emerging Voices Initiative is a group gathered from congregations across Mennonite Church Canada that sprang up on the Canadian Mennonite University campus in January 2016. Taking the Future Directions Task Force final report as an invitation to discernment, we have met regularly for prayer and discussion. In these meetings, we have named qualities we love about the church, challenges it faces, and desires for a future with congregations sharing a vibrant Anabaptist Mennonite identity across regions, countries, and beyond. It's encouraging then and hope-inspiring to me to hear that 28-year-old Jacqueline Jansen from Saskatchewan has been appointed to the new Joint Council of Mennonite Church Canada. Her voice will be very important around that table. Congregational consultant John Wimberly warns about putting too much energy, however, into governance at the expense of ministry in the community. Most millennials, he writes, want to be involved in community-oriented work, not church committees. And he goes on to address the matter of diversity in our congregations and communities. Younger generations appreciate and live daily with racial, ethnic, economic, and sexual orientation diversity in their friendships and workplaces. Can churches survive as homogeneous entities seeking to grow by attracting more people who look and think as they do? I think not, he says. LTURN, or Leadership Training for Under-Resourced Neighborhoods, is another example. An initiative in the Greater Toronto Area, the GTA, made possible by the Schmidt Bequest. It's an example of faith-based community ministry, equipping young adults to form and lead small faith communities in their urban neighborhoods. In their neighborhood, with people they know, where they grew up, to make a difference, a faith-based difference. A local young adult initiative is PI. You may be familiar with Pastors in Exile, founded by two young adults, Jessica Rieser-Rempel and Chris Bringes, and supported by MCEC. And Jessica and Chris have also been ALW instructors. Jessica describes PI as an organization that is not directly located within the church's walls, but one in which young adults are questioning their faith and where they fit in and find refuge. That in-between space to hold them where they are in their journey, and also look forward to how they might incorporate into another church and intergenerational context moving forward. A second hopeful sign is the new expressions of church and worship. I find hope and promise in the vibrant worship and variety of expressions of being church in many congregations of MCEC that I've visited in the course of the past 6 years. Now, the steady growth in membership programs, finances, and buildings of the 1960s and 70s are distant memories for most of these congregations and for many of us. And nostalgia, we know, won't bring back the good old days, though we still talk about them and hear about them. Today, there is greater diversity in worship and community life, however, in our congregations. Perhaps we've moved past in many cases at least, the so-called worship wars of the intervening years, into a recognition that this diversity among us can't be served with one particular style of worship or piety. The music we sing and the way we sing it both reflects and shapes our spirituality. Interest in workshops on worship and music offered by ALW, as Matthew already illustrated, is always strong. The new hymnal and accompaniment songbooks, including worship resources, are opportunities to explore and expand our repertoire. In a book entitled Divergent Church, The Bright Promise of Alternative Faith Communities, the authors remind us that something essential to being human is at stake here. What is at stake is more than the survival of the church. Let me repeat that. What is at stake is more than the survival of the church. What is at stake is more than organizational vibrancy as it relates to congregational life. What is at stake is the human yearning for meaning and transcendence. Congregations aren't going away. Neither is congregating. As these divergent churches, which they've studied, emerge with new ways to connect to the divine, the people involved in them will touch their cities, neighborhoods, workplaces, families, and friends. That's what being church means. Another commentator observes, our missing generations are not attracted to more programs to make their lives even busier. They are attracted to being an authentic community that engages life together, informed by shared values and faith practices. She warns against the flavor of the month programming that produced vitality somewhere else, without stopping to consider what the soul of this particular congregation requires. Relearning community is a journey of exploration and adventure into that vitality. Relearning community has taught us that the gospel mandate of turning outward to make disciples flows from a vital and authentic turning upward to God and growing inward as communities of faith, of love and peace. The three belong together. Many of our congregations are strong in two, but not many in all three, up and in and out. That's a culture shift in a number and variety of MCEC congregations who are on this relearning community journey. And as a participant observer over the past number of years, it's been exciting to see and be a part of. That vitality will grow and spread as personal practice and congregational culture changes. Now, it'll be different in each congregational context or community, to be sure, and it will take time. Culture change does. But I wonder how participants will reflect on this faith journey 20 or 40 years from now, when I'm gone. Thirdly, newcomers. Another sign of hope and promise is the newcomer churches who want to be Anabaptist Christians and are finding a spiritual home in MCEC. Pastor Tingsay of the Matuchin Christian Church in KW, which was accepted as an emerging church at the annual gathering in April, said, I studied a lot about what MCEC believes, and it is the same as we are doing and believe. So the elders and congregation decided that we want to become part of it. Most of the dozen or more emerging churches in MCEC, and Brian will tell us what that number is, are newcomers to Canada who are looking for affiliation with like-minded Christians and are finding resonance with our core beliefs, with our understanding of Jesus, of discipleship, of community life, of peace, justice, and service, of mission. And in doing so, in finding their resonance there and putting their energy there, they are reminding those of us who have grown up in or long been part of this faith community about the importance of those inherited core beliefs, deeply embedded, sometimes deeply hidden within our hearts, minds, and spirits. In a way, they are challenging us to live more fully, more faithfully and passionately into those core beliefs ourselves. Now, if you've participated in worship in one or another of some of these congregations, you'll know what I mean. And they don't keep time like Matthew does. The energy, enthusiasm, and decibel level are inspiring, contagious, and sometimes deafening. But their expression of faith and piety, the worship, hospitality, and passionate commitment to sharing the faith, to making disciples here and around the world, challenges us to renew our faith, our worship, and our witness. These sisters and brothers in the faith are inviting and preparing us to become an intercultural and international church in the face of growing localism and tribalism in our society, in our culture. First Mennonite Church here in KW, which includes at least, I think, 4 language groups at last count. Nancy, correct me. And Hagerman and Stouffville with 3 language groups together are just 2 examples of an experience, an experiment in intercultural life, worship, and ministry. I wonder, though, how we might more meaningfully engage with these newcomers among us. Even as they look to us Anglos to accompany them on the journey of integration into their new context and country, there is so much they have to teach us about faith and life, of discipleship, mission, and ministry. That is a yet mostly unexplored gift of the Spirit to the rest of us in MCEC and MC Canada. I also wonder how we might meaningfully invite and include the significantly large number of youth and young adults in many of these congregations. In our camps and schools, those programs and activities that have been and continue to be so instrumental for Christian formation and leadership training for our youth and young adults generally. And I wonder how we might make educational opportunities and leadership training for pastors and lay people more accessible and affordable. And ALW, as already noted, as it grows and flourishes, holds much promise for that endeavor. Fourthly, if you're keeping count, pastoral leadership. Keith Harder was denominational minister for MC USA when I began in that role for MC Canada in 2000. Our first meeting binationally was at AMBS, and as we introduced ourselves to one another, Keith asked when I had attended AMBS. I had to confess I hadn't. Given my role in promoting pastoral education, Keith quickly quipped, "You're not exactly a poster boy for the seminary, are you?" Busted, as they say. Educational expectations have changed significantly over the past decades. With the professionalization of ministerial leadership and the increasing complexity and demands of that role, graduate education has become an expectation. We have excellent training programs in our various post-secondary institutions. And trained and salaried professional pastoral leaders are the norm in many of our congregations. However, just as these educational expectations and offerings were being fine-tuned and implemented, many full-time pastoral roles disappeared. By now, well over half of pastoral roles in MCEC are part-time. That presents a variety of challenges for anyone entering ministry or needing a full-time salary. We will need to consider other models of ministry, including perhaps a return to credentialed lay ministry. New forms and expressions of congregational and community ministry are emerging as well, requiring a review of what credentials mean. Licensing and ordination, for example, how they are granted and how to maintain meaningful accountability for them, given our congregational polity. Pastoral leaders in our newcomer congregations or church plants seldom have or are able to pursue the expected graduate level education. Few of these congregations have the financial resources to offer full-time or sometimes even part-time salaries, which means that most of their pastors are either bivocational or voluntary? How do we adjust our expectations and our resources to accommodate those circumstances? How can and will we support these leaders in meaningful ways as they serve their growing congregations? Here, among other places and ways, is another opportunity and challenge for the ALW. Well, finally, some other changes and challenges briefly. A significant change over the past generation is the number of women in ministry in MCEC, to which Ralph significantly encouraged and mentored. Among active ministers, that number now is close to 40%. While acceptance of female pastoral leadership is widespread, it is not uniformly accepted, at least in the lead minister role. A growing number of congregations have carefully and consciously moved to inclusion of LGBTQ+ folks in membership and leadership, some including pastoral leadership. Pastors are typically staying much longer in a congregation for a whole variety of reasons, usually good ones. This longevity appears to benefit everyone. Relocation has become more difficult for pastoral families. There is currently very little movement north and south between Canada and the US, and even east and west. We are still, however, not immune to conflicts and involuntary endings. Often the conflict is rooted in congregational history or culture and proves difficult to resolve amicably. Considerable MCEC staff resources are invested in these situations and congregations. And while the number of retirements will increase in the coming years as we boomers age, there are numerous other reasons for leaving ministry. Over the past 15 years or so, the attrition rate, if you will, has been about 1/3. A growing number of new pastors in MCEC are coming from other Anabaptist groups or denominations. The challenge of calling and equipping enough suitable pastoral leaders for our congregations continues to grow. And given the emphasis on pastoral or shepherding and teaching gifts, as Brian Bauman often reminds us, the challenge and opportunity of engaging the gifts of apostles, prophets, and evangelists among us remains. Let me conclude with 2 quotations to sum up the hope, the promise, and opportunity. In an article in the Mennonite Church Leader magazine entitled "Scattered to Gather, Moving Beyond Worship That Relies on Culture and Tradition," Kelly Bates Oglesby calls the church to, quote, "listen to the wildly apostolic and fervently prophetic voices that challenge us to always seek the lost and marginalized. We must recognize," she continues, "that congregating in the same place does not make us bearers of the gospel. The tenacity we have for entrenching worship in location and tradition will not endure, nor will it expand. We must take worship to the people. Why? Jesus commissioned us to go and make disciples, not to make a sign reporting when we expect to be available." New York Times columnist David Brooks challenges evangelical Christians, and he calls them social conservatives, to live out the faith they profess, asserting that they, or we, have what this broken, hurting world needs. And I quote, "Social conservatives could be the people who help reweave the sinews of society. Help reweave the sinews of society. They already subscribe to a faith built on selfless love. They can serve as examples of commitment. They are equipped with a vocabulary to distinguish right from wrong, what dignifies and what demeans. They already, but in private, tithe to the poor and nurture the lonely. The struggle today," he concludes, "is to repair a society rendered atomized, unforgiving, and inhospitable. Social conservatives, Christians, are well equipped to repair this fabric and to serve as messengers of love, dignity, commitment, communion, and grace." That, my friends, is the call and mission of the Christian Church, of the Mennonite Church and its leaders today. May it be so.